The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Clarence's house as Camilla sat in her private study, carefully examining a delicate emerald necklace. The piece had belonged to her grandmother, passed down through generations of her family. She held it up to the light, watching the gems sparkle like captured starlight. A sharp knock echoed through the room, making her heart skip. Without waiting for permission, 3 members of the royal guard entered, their faces stern and official. The lead officer, a tall man with graying temples, stepped forward with a document in his hand. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice formal and cold, "we have received orders to conduct a thorough search of your personal belongings." Camilla's hands trembled slightly as she set down the necklace. "A search? Whatever for?" she asked, though she tried to keep her voice steady. The officers exchanged glances, and she noticed how their eyes seemed to avoid meeting hers directly. "There have been reports of missing items from the crown jewels collection," the officer explained. "Several pieces of significant historical value have been discovered to be absent from their designated locations. We must examine all royal residences and personal collections." The room suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. Camilla watched as the guards began systematically going through her jewelry boxes, her desk drawers, even the books on her shelves. Each movement felt like an invasion, each opened box like a violation of her privacy. "Surely you don't suspect me of—" she began, but the words died in her throat as she saw the serious expressions on their faces. The accusation hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. As the hours passed, Camilla sat helplessly in her chair, watching strangers handle her most precious possessions. Family photographs were moved aside, personal letters were briefly examined, and jewelry that held decades of memories was catalogued and photographed. The emerald necklace she had been admiring was placed in a clear evidence bag, along with several other pieces. The lead officer approached her with a growing collection of items. "We'll need to take these for further examination," he said, not unkindly but with the firmness of duty. They matched descriptions of missing pieces from the royal collection. Camilla's world began to crumble around her. These weren't stolen treasures. They were her inheritance, her connection to her family's history. But as she looked at the items laid out before her, a cold realization began to settle in her stomach. Some of the pieces did look remarkably similar to items she had seen in royal portraits and official photographs. "There must be some mistake," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. But deep down a terrible doubt was beginning to form. Had her beloved grandmother unknowingly come into possession of items that didn't rightfully belong to their family? Or worse, had someone deliberately deceived them about the origins of these precious heirlooms? The guards continued their work with mechanical precision, and with each item they confiscated, Camilla felt a piece of her identity being stripped away. These belongings weren't just objects, they were the tangible links to her past, the stories of her ancestors, the foundation of who she believed herself to be. As the afternoon shadows grew longer, Camilla found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about her family's history. The jewelry, the artwork, even some of the furniture. How much of it was truly theirs? The uncertainty was more painful than any direct accusation could have been. The palace felt different the next morning. Whispers followed Camilla wherever she walked, and conversations stopped abruptly when she entered a room. The staff, who had always been respectful but warm, now seemed cautious and distant. Even her morning tea tasted bitter as she sat alone in the breakfast room, staring at the empty spaces where her confiscated belongings once stood. News of the investigation had somehow leaked to the press. Despite the palace's attempts at secrecy, headlines screamed accusations across every newspaper and website. "Queen Consort under investigation" and "Royal Scandal Rocks the Monarchy" blazed from every newsstand. Camilla's photograph, looking startled and guilty, was plastered across social media with countless theories and speculation. Her private secretary, Margaret, entered the room with a stack of newspapers and a worried expression. "Your Majesty, perhaps we should prepare a statement," she suggested gently. "The public reaction is quite intense." Camilla picked up one of the papers with shaking hands. The article painted her as a scheming woman who had somehow manipulated her way into possession of priceless royal artifacts. Comments from anonymous palace sources suggested that she had always been ambitious and calculating. Reading the words felt like being stabbed repeatedly with tiny knives. "How did this happen, Margaret?" Camilla asked, her voice barely above a whisper. These pieces have been in my family for generations. My grandmother wore that emerald necklace to my mother's wedding. The pearl bracelet was given to my great-aunt by her husband when their son was born. Margaret sat down beside her, something she wouldn't normally do. But these weren't normal circumstances. Sometimes family stories change as they're passed down, she said carefully. Perhaps there are details that were forgotten or altered over time. The possibility that her entire family history might be built on lies was devastating. Camilla thought about all the stories her grandmother had told her, tales of romance, adventure, and family pride. Had they all been fabrications? Had her beloved grandmother unknowingly been living with stolen goods, or worse? Had she known the truth all along? A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. King Charles entered, his face grave and tired. The man she loved looked older than his years. Burdened by the weight of this scandal that was threatening to destroy the monarchy's reputation, "The investigators want to speak with you again," he said quietly. "They've found more connections between your pieces and items that went missing from various royal collections over the past century." Camilla felt the blood drain from her face. "More connections? But Charles, I swear to you, I had no idea. These things have been in my family since before I was born." Charles sat beside her and took her hands in his. "I believe you," he said, but she could hear the strain in his voice. "But the evidence is concerning. They've traced some of the pieces to thefts that occurred during your grandmother's youth. There are records of her having access to certain areas of royal residences where she worked briefly as a young woman." The revelation hit Camilla like a physical blow. Her grandmother had worked at royal residences? This was news to her. How many other secrets had been kept from her? How many other lies had shaped her understanding of her family's past? "What are you saying?" she whispered. "I'm saying that we need to find out the truth," Charles replied. "For your sake, for the monarchy's sake, and for the sake of everyone who has been affected by this. The investigators are being thorough, but they're also being fair. If there's an innocent explanation, we'll find it." But as Camilla looked into her husband's eyes, she could see the doubt there, carefully hidden but unmistakably present. The man who had promised to stand by her through everything was beginning to question her innocence. And if Charles couldn't fully believe her, how could she expect anyone else to? Driven by desperation and a need to clear her name, Camilla decided to conduct her own investigation. Late at night, when the palace was quiet, she made her way to the royal archives. Her security detail followed at a distance, their presence a constant reminder that she was no longer fully trusted. The archive keeper, an elderly man named Mr. Whitfield who had worked at the palace for over 40 years, looked surprised to see her at such an unusual hour. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing slightly. "How may I assist you?" "I need to see any records related to my grandmother, Elena Rosewood," Camilla said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Particularly any employment records from the 1940s and 1950s. Mr. Whitfield's expression grew uncomfortable. "Your Majesty, those files are restricted. Perhaps if you could obtain proper authorization." "I am the Queen Consort," Camilla said firmly. "I am giving myself authorization." After a moment's hesitation, Mr. Whitfield led her deep into the archives. The smell of old paper and leather filled the air as they navigated through rows of filing cabinets and document boxes. Finally, he pulled out a thick folder marked with her grandmother's name. Camilla's hands trembled as she opened the file. The first document was an employment record from 1949, showing that Elena Rosewood had indeed worked as a maid in the private quarters of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. The job had lasted only 6 months, and the reason for termination was listed as misconduct. Her heart sank as she read further. There were reports of missing jewelry, small at first, a brooch here, a pair of earrings there. Elena had been questioned multiple times, but nothing could be proven. Finally, when a valuable necklace disappeared from the Queen Mother's personal collection, Elena had been dismissed immediately. "This can't be right," Camilla whispered. But the documents were official, bearing royal seals and signatures. There were photographs of the missing items, and some of them looked disturbingly familiar. Mr. Whitfield cleared his throat nervously. "Your Majesty, there are more documents. From the 1960s. The next set of files revealed that Elena had later found employment at several other noble houses, always in positions that gave her access to valuable items. And in each case there had been thefts. Small, carefully chosen pieces that wouldn't be missed immediately, if at all. Camilla sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the evidence. Her beloved grandmother, the woman who had taught her about dignity and grace, had apparently been a skilled thief. The family heirlooms she treasured weren't heirlooms at all. They were stolen goods accumulated over decades of careful theft. "There's one more thing," Mr. Whitfield said gently. He handed her a sealed envelope marked, "Personal Effects, Elena Rosewood, deceased 1987. Inside the envelope was a letter in her grandmother's handwriting, apparently written shortly before her death. With shaking hands, Camilla began to read. "My dearest Camilla, if you are reading this, then the truth has finally come to light. I hoped it never would, but I knew this day might come. The beautiful things I gave you, the jewelry and treasures you believe are our family legacy, they were never ours to begin with." The letter went on to explain how Elena had started taking small items to survive after losing her first job, how the thefts had become easier over time, and how she had convinced herself that the wealthy families she stole from would never miss these trinkets. She had created elaborate stories about their family history to explain the valuable items, and over the years, she had come to almost believe the lies herself. "I wanted to give you a better life," the letter continued. "I wanted you to feel proud of where you came from, to have beautiful things that would make you feel special. But I know now that I was wrong. These things were never ours, and the pride you feel in them is built on deception. I am so sorry, my darling. I hope someday you can forgive a foolish old woman who loved you more than her own conscience." Camilla clutched the letter to her chest, tears streaming down her face. The grandmother she had idealized, the family history she had cherished, the very foundation of her identity, all of it was crumbling around her. But perhaps worst of all was the realization that she had unknowingly been living with and displaying stolen property for decades, bringing shame not only to herself, but to the entire royal family. Armed with her grandmother's confession letter, Camilla knew she had to face the truth no matter how painful. She requested an immediate meeting with the head of the Royal Guard's investigation team and the palace's legal advisors. The meeting was scheduled for the following morning in the king's private office. Charles sat beside her as she handed over the letter to Detective Inspector Hamilton, the lead investigator. The room was silent except for the ticking of an antique clock as Hamilton read through Elena's confession. His expression remained professionally neutral, but Camilla could see the weight of the revelation in his eyes. "This certainly explains a great deal," Hamilton said finally. "We've been puzzled by the pattern of thefts. They were too sophisticated for random burglaries but too personal for organized crime. A long-term employee with intimate knowledge of the households makes perfect sense." Sir Geoffrey Morrison, the palace's chief legal advisor, leaned forward. "Your Majesty, while this letter provides clarity about the origin of the items, it doesn't necessarily resolve the legal complications. The stolen property will need to be returned to its rightful owners or their estates where possible." Camilla nodded, though each word felt like another weight added to her shoulders. "Of course. I want everything returned immediately. But what about the families who were robbed? Some of these thefts happened decades ago. The pain and confusion they must have felt. We're already working on tracking down the original owners," Hamilton assured her. "Some pieces belong to royal collections, others to private families. In several cases, insurance claims were filed and paid out, which complicates matters somewhat." Charles reached for Camilla's hand. "What about public perception? The media is having a field day with this story. Every newspaper in the country is running headlines about the thieving queen consort." Sir Geoffrey cleared his throat diplomatically. "We recommend complete transparency, Your Majesty. A full public statement acknowledging what happened, expressing sincere remorse and detailing the steps being taken to make things right. The public tends to respond better to honesty than to cover-ups." The thought of facing the nation with this humiliating truth made Camilla feel physically sick. She had spent years trying to earn the public's respect and acceptance, and now she would have to admit that her entire life had been built on a foundation of lies and theft. "There's something else we need to discuss," Hamilton continued carefully. "We found evidence that some of the items in your possession may have connections to other unsolved thefts from the 1970s and 1980s. It appears your grandmother continued her activities well into her later years." Camilla felt as though the ground was shifting beneath her feet. "How many families did she steal from?" "We're still investigating, but preliminary evidence suggests at least a dozen households over a period of nearly 40 years. The total value of the stolen items could be in the millions." The scope of her grandmother's crimes was staggering. Elena hadn't been a desperate woman making a few poor choices. She had been a career criminal, systematically stealing from the wealthy families who trusted her with access to their homes and valuables. "I need to see all of it," Camilla said suddenly. "Every piece, every family that was affected. I need to understand the full extent of what she did." Hamilton exchanged glances with Sir Geoffrey. "Your Majesty, that might not be advisable from a legal standpoint." "I don't care about legal standpoints," Camilla interrupted, surprising everyone with the firmness in her voice. "These people were robbed because my grandmother had access to their homes. They lost precious family heirlooms, items with sentimental value that can never be replaced. They deserve more than just getting their property back. They deserve a personal apology from me." Charles squeezed her hand gently. "Camilla, you weren't responsible for what your grandmother did." "But I benefited from it," she replied. "I wore those stolen jewels to state dinners. I displayed stolen artwork in my home. I told people stories about my family's prestigious history, not knowing it was all built on theft. I may not have committed the crimes, but I was an unknowing accomplice to covering them up for decades." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the weight of her words. Camilla realized that clearing her legal name would be the easy part. The real challenge would be living with the knowledge of what her beloved grandmother had done, and finding a way to make amends for decades of unwitting participation in those crimes. "I want to contact every family personally," she said finally. "I want to return their property myself and apologize face to face. It's the least I can do." The public statement was scheduled for the following week, but Camilla insisted on beginning the personal apologies immediately. Her first visit was to Lady Margaret Thornfield, an elderly woman whose family had employed Elena as a housekeeper in the 1960s. The Thornfield family had lost several precious pieces, including a diamond brooch that had belonged to Lady Margaret's mother. Camilla arrived at the modest country estate with a small security detail and a heavy heart. Lady Margaret, now in her 80s, received her in a sun-filled drawing room, filled with family photographs and well-worn furniture. Despite her advanced age, her eyes were sharp and alert. "Your Majesty," Lady Margaret said, rising carefully from her chair. "This is quite unexpected." Camilla had rehearsed her words dozens of times, but now they seemed inadequate. "Lady Margaret, I've come to return something that belongs to you, and to apologize for a terrible wrong that was done to your family." She opened the velvet case she carried and revealed the diamond brooch. Lady Margaret's hand flew to her throat and tears immediately filled her eyes. "Mother's brooch," she whispered. "We thought it was lost forever. Mother was heartbroken when it disappeared. She wore it on her wedding day and her mother before her. It was the one piece of jewelry she had specifically requested I inherit." "I'm so deeply sorry," Camilla said, her own voice breaking. "I had no idea it was stolen. My grandmother told me it had been in our family for generations. I've worn it to state functions, not knowing the pain its absence caused your family." Lady Margaret took the brooch with trembling hands, holding it as if it were made of the most delicate glass. "You know, we suspected Elena," she said quietly, "but we could never prove anything. She was so charming, so trustworthy. My parents felt terrible about their suspicions." "Your instincts were correct," Camilla admitted. "The investigation has revealed that my grandmother stole from many families over many years. I know this doesn't undo the hurt, but I wanted you to hear this apology directly from me." To Camilla's surprise, Lady Margaret reached out and took her hand. "My dear, you were a child when this happened. The sins of our ancestors are not our own to bear. But you're coming here today facing this difficult truth. That takes tremendous courage." The conversation continued for over an hour, with Lady Margaret sharing memories of her mother and the significance of the returned pieces. As Camilla prepared to leave, she felt something she hadn't expected, a sense of relief. The truth was painful, but it was also liberating. Her next visit was more challenging. The Henley family had employed Elena in the 1970s, and several valuable paintings had disappeared during her tenure. Jonathan Henley, now a successful businessman in his 50s, was less forgiving than Lady Margaret had been. "So the Queen Consort is a fence for stolen goods," he said coldly when Camilla arrived at his London office. How delightfully modern. Camilla had expected anger and was prepared for it. "Mr. Henley, I understand your bitterness. Your family was violated in the worst possible way. Someone you trusted stole precious things from your home. Not just precious things, Henley snapped. That painting your grandmother stole was my great-grandfather's portrait, painted by a family friend. It wasn't valuable to anyone but us, but it was irreplaceable. Do you know what it's like to grow up hearing about this amazing family treasure and never being able to see it? The portrait sat on an easel between them, finally returned to its rightful home. Camilla could see why it would have meant so much to the family. It showed a distinguished gentleman in military uniform, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. I cannot undo what my grandmother did, Camilla said carefully, but I can ensure that it never happens again. I'm also prepared to discuss compensation for the decades you were deprived of your family heirloom. Henley was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. You really didn't know, did you? About what she was doing? No, Camilla replied honestly. I thought she was an honorable woman who had worked hard to provide nice things for her family. I was completely wrong about who she was. Something in Henley's expression softened slightly. That must be devastating for you, to discover that someone you loved and respected was living a lie. It is, Camilla admitted, but not as devastating as it must have been for your family to lose something so precious. I'm committed to making this right in whatever way possible. Over the following weeks, Camilla continued her personal apology tour, visiting family after family, returning stolen treasures and facing the consequences of her grandmother's crimes. Each meeting was emotionally draining but also necessary. She was slowly beginning to understand the true cost of Elena's actions, not just the monetary value of the stolen items, but the emotional trauma inflicted on innocent families. 3 months after the investigation began, Camilla stood before the nation to deliver what would become known as one of the most honest and heartfelt royal addresses in modern history. She had insisted on speaking without a script, wanting her words to come directly from her heart. My fellow citizens, she began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to confess. I stand before you today to acknowledge a painful truth that has shaken me to my very core. For decades, I unknowingly possessed and displayed items that were stolen from innocent families by my grandmother, Elna Rosewood. The camera captured every emotion on her face as she continued. I have spent the past months returning these precious belongings to their rightful owners and offering personal apologies to each family affected. I cannot undo the pain and loss they experienced, but I can ensure that the truth is finally told. She spoke about the investigation, about finding her grandmother's confession letter, and about the difficult process of accepting that someone she had loved and admired had been living a lie. She didn't try to minimize Elena's crimes or make excuses for them. Some have asked whether I should have known, whether I should have questioned the origins of these beautiful things. Perhaps I should have, but I trusted the stories I was told. Just as these families trusted my grandmother in their homes, we were all deceived by someone we believed to be honorable. The public response was mixed but largely sympathetic. While some criticized Camilla for her perceived naivety, many more were moved by her courage in facing such a humiliating truth publicly. Social media, which had been brutal during the early days of the scandal, began to shift toward messages of support and admiration for her handling of the crisis. Lady Margaret Thornfield appeared on several news programs, speaking eloquently about Camilla's personal visit and the grace with which she had handled the situation. She could have sent a representative, Lady Margaret told one interviewer. She could have hidden behind lawyers and official statements. Instead, she looked me in the eye and took responsibility for something that wasn't even her fault. That takes real character. Even Jonathan Henley, who had been so angry during their initial meeting, eventually spoke to the press about his respect for Camilla's approach. She didn't have to come see me personally, he admitted. She could have just returned the painting and moved on, but she sat in my office and listened to my anger, and she took it without defending herself. That's not what I expected from royalty. The legal complications took longer to resolve. Several insurance companies had to be involved, as some families had been compensated for their losses decades earlier. Complex negotiations determined how to handle cases where the original owners had died, and the legal heirs were difficult to identify. Camilla established a special fund to ensure that any remaining complications would be resolved fairly, and that affected families would receive appropriate compensation for their decades of loss. Perhaps most importantly, Camilla used the scandal as an opportunity to establish new protocols for the royal household. All personal collections belonging to royal family members would now be regularly audited and documented. Background checks for household staff were strengthened, and new systems were put in place to track valuable items and prevent future thefts. 6 months after the scandal broke, Camilla sat in her study, the same room where the investigation had begun. The walls, once adorned with what she had believed to be family treasures, now displayed photographs and artwork with clear, documented provenance. The space felt different, more honest somehow. Charles found her there one evening reading a letter from one of the affected families. "Good news?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. "The Morrison family wants to thank us again," Camilla said, showing him the letter. Their grandmother's ring meant so much to them. Mrs. Morrison says wearing it again has helped her feel connected to her family history. Charles took her hand gently. "Are you all right with all of this?" "Really all right?" Camilla considered the question carefully. The scandal had been devastating, but it had also been strangely liberating. "I spent my whole life trying to live up to stories that weren't true," she said finally. "Now I get to build something real, something honest. It's harder, but it's also better." She had learned that true dignity didn't come from inherited treasures or fabricated family histories. It came from facing difficult truths with courage, taking responsibility for wrongs even when they weren't your own doing, and working tirelessly to make things right. The stolen jewels were gone, but Camilla had discovered something far more valuable: the respect that comes from genuine integrity and the peace that follows honest action. The scandal that had threatened to destroy her reputation ultimately became the foundation for a stronger, more authentic relationship with the British people, built not on the false glamour of stolen treasures, but on the real beauty of truth and accountability.